Okay, so I promised you this video, and you are going to get it. We are going to be looking at the strongest potential nominees and weakest potential nominees for the Democratic and Republican parties going into election time, going into 2024. So, there's a number of people we want to look at, want to think about. Obviously, the most obvious candidate going into 2024 is Joe Biden. If he decides to run for re-election, he may just be saying he plans to, so he doesn't become a lame duck president. If he runs again, obviously, he's got the primary sewn up, as any incumbent president does, so, we know what will happen there. When it comes to the more nuanced situation in terms of a presidential race, I think, if you run with Joe Biden, you've probably got a good chance of holding where the Democrats won previously. You might see slightly better results for Republicans, but I think Joe Biden, for a number of reasons, primarily, above all else, the fact he's an incumbent, because even when incumbent presidents are seen as a bit lackluster, a bit weak, they still often manage to squeak their way to re-election, and the reason for that is when someone's in the White House, the electorate is very cautious about deciding to throw them out. If you have someone like Joe Biden in, he can make the arguments, look, I might not be perfect, you might not agree with everything I say, but I got us through COVID, etc., 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 and he could probably cruise to re-election with at least these margins, and if he has, big gains to tout, there are various avenues for expansion along the map, which, of course, are within the realms of possibility. So, Joe Biden, probably, as of right now, the strongest potential candidate for the Democrats going into 2024, but by no means the most likely. The most likely is probably Kamala Harris, and the reason for that is, of course, Joe Biden will be 82. She will be sort of seen as the heir to his political legacy, if you like. So if we think Kamala Harris, will she win the primaries? Who will she face? She'll probably face she could face Warren again, won't face Bloomberg, could face Buttigieg, who Biden's apparently fond of, could also face, on the progressive end, AOC, could face Warren again. Not Bloomberg, definitely not Bloomberg. But, there are a number of candidates that could turn up. You could see Stacey Abrams run. She's talked openly about wanting to run for the presidency at some point. Was right up there in terms of consideration for Biden's vice president. So who wins here? Well, I'm not going to do the exact states because it is absolutely too difficult to know who's going to win the exact states at this time. But we'll just go for the raw numbers. So we could probably say quite comfortably that Kamala Harris will do well. Will probably, in the end, win the most delegates, will probably win the primary, but I think it would be very likely you'd see a strong showing from the left, and you'll probably see it polarise into two camps, and absolutely you will see the progressive wing coalesce around one person and the more conservative wing coalesce around one person, and I think with Kamala Harris, she's in office, she's the sitting VP, you'll see quite an easy win for the more conservative end of the party, simply by the fact that they're the incumbent winning of the party, and anyone else will sort of get tossed by the wayside. So we'll see, but as of right now, I think Kamala Harris pretty much has that primary sewn up, although I think that can change. You could either see, someone like Buttigieg from, another wing, the same wing of the party, running and sort of basically Kamala Harris doesn't perform well politically and another centrist or another more moderate candidate comes in and takes the crown. You could, of course, it's plausible you could see a surge for a progressive candidate like an AOC or a Warren, but I think in 2024 that might be unlikely for a number of structural reasons in terms of the voters that vote most likely to vote in the Democratic primary. It would be a big shift. I think 2028 would be much more favourable for something like that. But if the Biden administration really fails to deliver in the eyes of sort of their base, it's absolutely possible. It could be someone like Warren. It could be someone like AOC. We just don't know. More likely to be Warren, I would say. I think AOC's a long shot, but it's within the realm of possibility. Of course, the question then is how would she perform in the general election? That's another question. But I think as of right now, if you look at the polling as of today, you had Super Tuesday today, Kamala Harris is going to sweep the board with people like Buttigieg and AOC picking up around there, Warren picking up here and there, and that's more or less what the state of the race would be. In terms of the presidential, I mean, how strong is Kamala Harris as a nominee? I think Kamala Harris is relatively weak as a Democratic nominee. I don't think it is beyond the realms of possibility that she pulls off a win. I think she is weaker for a number of reasons. Primarily the fact that she is not an incumbent. She's not an incumbent president. Incumbent presidents do well at the presidential level when they run for re-election. Voters need a really big push to decide to do away with a sitting president. That's a big step. That's not something that most voters do lightly. It's not something they're likely to do very often. So Kamala Harris runs, it does give voters an excuse to, in a relatively painless manner, choose to go with a Republican. How would that shake out? Well, if Kamala Harris's popularity is where it is right now, I think you're going to see quite an unfortunate loss. If Kamala Harris's popularity improves, she proves herself to be a decent campaigner, the economy is favourable, and again, sitting VPs don't have a great track record in elections, running sort of on the legacy. The only person that's really done it in modern times was George H.W. Bush. You know, if that's the case, of course, there's avenues for expansion in states like Texas, North Carolina. We just don't know. Maybe the Republicans managed to take the Rust Belt, take Minnesota, but Democrats managed to take a state like Texas or North Carolina. You don't know. Maybe Kamala Harris as a candidate will enthuse minority voters more than Joe Biden did. And, you know, you could see the Obama coalition sort of reassemble in certain states, certain Sunbelt states like Ohio. Anything's up for grabs. We're so early right now. But in my opinion, if it was held today, we're probably looking at a result just by virtue of the fact she's unpopular, the administration, you know, the people are feeling a little bit less optimistic about the economy right now, all these sort of different factors coming into play. I think you'll see a result like this. Over on the Republican side, in fact, we'll just have a think. We'll just have a look at what would happen if we ran AOC or Warren or a progressive. Again, I think it depends on how the liberal wing of the media portray them, because if the liberal wing of the media are more critical than they are of centrist Democrats, that will damage a candidate. If Republican attack lines succeed, you know, and they don't manage to push back on them, you would, of course, see a pretty negative, pretty poor result, very poor result. You know, worst case scenario would be all the attack lines from the Republicans really stick, no defenses put up, and the result looks like this. Equally, you could enthuse the base enough to turn out young people, renters, minority voters in the right states, enthuse them enough, and you could see, again, possibilities open up that you hadn't thought of before. States that you didn't think were up for grabs could be up for grabs. It could go one of those two ways. It could be a really big success, but it's a gamble for Democrats. Right? It could be a really big success, but it could also be an absolute flop. And all the Democrats, all the Republican attack lines could hit. We don't know. Now, in terms of the Republican Party, there's really only one name on everyone's lips, and that is the name of former President Donald J. Trump. If Donald Trump runs in 2024, he really does have the primary sewn up. Let's say we've got Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Donald Trump, and we'll put in, who's a liberal? Let's say someone like Romney. I mean, he's not going to run, but let's say he does. You know, progressive liberal standard bearer in the Republican Party. In compared to Trump, he's definitely a conservative, but you get where I'm going. I mean, who else could go? I'm trying to think. There aren't many any traditional Republicans, are there? I think Trump cleans up, right? He cleans up the race. Is there any state he would lose in? Maybe it's possible. One state goes for a more centrist Democrat. It's possible. Centrist Republican. It's possible. It's not wholly likely. But yeah, I think Trump cleans up. If Trump is not in the race, that's a bigger question, right? If Trump isn't in the race, who runs? Well, let's look how this would shake down. The big, let's say Pence, DeSantis, the two sort of main contenders right now. We could put a couple more names in. Let's say someone like Romney runs. We'll put Romney as sort of generic moderate Republican, right? It could be any of them. They're all very samey. We could say Cruz runs. We could say Pompeo runs. And we could say Marjorie Taylor Greene runs. Okay, what happens? Well, I think Pence isn't going to do as well as you might think. I think Pence has alienated plenty of the Republican base. I think as of right now, DeSantis is where you want to put your money. That's where the smart money is. And I think people like Cruz, Pompeo, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't think she'd win any states right now. But I think we'd see something like this. I think DeSantis would clean up at the end of the day. In terms of the presidential election, who is most likely to be able to defeat a Democrat who would have the best shot at that? I actually don't think it would be a conservative Republican, and the reason for that is I think the likes of Trump, the likes of his allies in the party would really attack this guy. I think whoever it is, this man or woman, they would really hammer them, say this is not who we want to be the standard bearer for our party. And I think the net result would be decreased Republican turnout in many key states among millions of voters. And I think what you would see as a result of that is probably a uniquely strong Democratic result simply by virtue of Republicans not bothering to turn out. I think you'd see something like this. Things like Texas flipping. We're looking at things like that in Texas, Ohio, in theory. I think in reality, that's more something likely to happen in 2028, 2032 even, dare I say. But I think you could see something like this very plausibly. If we have Trump run, what happens? Well, I think Trump is not their strongest bet. I think their strongest bet would be a Trump-ish Republican that doesn't have the baggage that Trump has. I think if Trump runs, you will basically see a rerun of 2020 in 2024. I think he will hold on in the places he needs to hold on. I don't think he will lose extra ground to the Democrats. Maybe here or there he will, but not in any sort of major way. I think he'll win where you expect him to win. I think you could see room for expansion again, somewhere like North Carolina. All contingent upon whether his ratings improve. I think Florida's a bit of a long shot, to be honest. I think, Texas is within the realm of possibility. It's very unlikely. Ohio within the realm of possibility, but very unlikely. But I think you would at least see a result like this, which is, if you look at the numbers, a slight improvement on 2020 for the Democratic Party. Someone like DeSantis is probably Republicans' best bet in 2024. I've kept saying 2022. I'm talking about 2024. I think in 2024, Republicans' best bet would be someone like DeSantis or Pence. Probably DeSantis, someone who can do the populist thing, not alienate the Trump base, but also not be as viscerally upsetting for moderate voters as someone like Donald Trump is. And I think that would see you could take back the Rust Belt on a good night. You could take back Georgia. You could take Arizona. You could maybe expand into New Mexico, into Virginia, Minnesota. think all of that is possible. Colorado. But I also think if the economy is doing well, if the Democrats are doing well, I think a really strong Republican nominee who hasn't let sort of any attacks stick to them would fight this down to a close race, but maybe not close enough to win, or just close enough to win. I think you could plausibly see a result like this. Again, it makes it close, and if we have a relatively popular Democratic nominee and a relatively popular Republican nominee, although both probably in negative approval, knowing the state of American politics, it really will come down to what way Georgia goes or what way Wisconsin goes, and it could really be narrow. It could be contingent on a state like Arizona. It could be contingent on Arizona, New Mexico. What way do they go? Wisconsin, what way does it go? And it would really be on a knife edge like that, with only a few thousand votes in a few key states being the difference between a result that looks like this, a result that looks even better than this, looks like this, and a result that looks, like this. There's not a big difference. That could be 10,000 votes in each state. Even if we take out of contention states like Burt and Blair and say they're foregone conclusions. Anyway, that is it from me for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more US election content on this channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon.